on SAFM.
All right, it's 11:15 here on Morning Talk on SAFM. A very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us here on Morning Talk. Now, what occurs during the audit process and how to get it right? This morning we evaluate and explain the objectives and scope of the audit itself. Sindi Zilwa is CEO of Nkonki, joins us this morning. Good morning to you.
Morning, Vuyo, and morning to the listeners.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. So what's auditing? What does the audit process entail? What does it mean?
An audit process is a very simple process. If, for instance, a company has got a set of financial statements, and in there it has got assets, it has got liabilities, assets, the assets that they own, and then liabilities, monies that they owe to the banks, and they have got income, which is like sales or the revenue they have generated, and the expenses that they have incurred. An audit process takes an angle of assuring that those amounts are stated correctly. For example, if it's an asset, does this asset really belong to you? Is it really valued at the amount? If you're saying it's 10 billion, is it really worth 10 billion or 1 billion? And is it generating the benefits for the business that it was intended to? And then on liabilities, you have to confirm that the amounts are correct, they have not been understated, and the bankers or the people who owe you, the auditors rely on those people to confirm the amounts that are being owed. Same thing when it comes to revenue that you saved, you've generated. You can't just say, my sales for this year were 1 billion. You can't say that because the auditors have to be sure that that amount is correctly stated and it's actually supported by movements of goods and transactions amounting to the same amount of money and the expenses as well.
So it's a verification process, really?
Yes, it is.
You verify the information as stated in the books of the company?
Yes, but then there's an additional part to it. That if a company has to comply with certain processes, an audit process will check if there has been compliance with that. For instance, the government departments and the state-owned entities, they've got to comply with the Public Finance and Management Act. There are some things that they have to do, so an audit process will be to check. Yes, we have seen this amount, you have paid for that, but did you go through a correct process?
Yes.
Was it properly budgeted for and was it approved?
Wasteful expenditure.
Exactly. And then the other one, wasteful expenditure, let me just correct that. Wasteful expenditure is when you have spent money that you could have avoided.
Yeah.
For instance, you've paid your creditors late. We know, for instance, small businesses, they always complain that the government departments, they pay them late.
Yes.
Then if they are charging them interest and then the department ends up paying them an additional amount as interest, the issue is that you could have avoided that expense had you done your job and paid this person within 30 days. So that is what is termed as wasteful expenditure.
But if the money had not come in from Treasury,
it is still wasteful because had you followed the process and got your money in time, submitted what Treasury wanted you to submit on time so that the money can be released and then you can pay your creditors within that time and avoid an interest charge or penalties, for instance, penalties for late payment, then that would be an example of a wasteful expenditure. Then the last process that I would like to explain is the performance auditing part because as we know, state departments and even any other companies, they have got performance objectives. So if you're saying, I have got to build so many schools or so many clinics, first of all, those performance objectives must be measurable. You can't say I will build schools. You must be specific to say 10 schools and across which provinces. Then the audit process will check, did you have those clear measurable goals? Because it all starts with the goals. And then now, did you manage to achieve in terms of what you were expected to achieve? So therefore, you look into the compliance process. So the regulatory environment in which the company operates is taken into account, and so compliance is quite important and it's key. The performance management is very critical because service delivery is directly linked to the performance objectives of a particular state company. And then lastly then is the verification of the actual numbers.
Okay, so internal audit versus external audit, how do the two differ?
They differ a lot. External audit is about this verification process I'm talking about. To say, once the set of financial statements is there, an external auditor works in such a way that he is able to support his opinion as to whether those statements are a fair representation. And you must notice the word fair representation, because if something is accurate versus fair, those are two different things. If it's accurate, you are saying these assets are $1 billion, yes, they are $1 billion.
Correct.
If you're saying fair, You're saying they are not a billion, but yet they are said to be 100 million, because now that's too far apart. So it's quite material. So the external audit process focuses on issuing that opinion.
About whether it's fair?
Yes, about the fair presentation.
Whether it's fair?
It's the entire audit process. It's the materiality. Some companies would say, some auditors would come in and say, based on this, it will be 5% of that amount, meaning that I could allow any variations that are within this particular percentage, which is normally a very small amount compared to the actual asset base that you are looking at. So therefore, if the errors are within that materiality or that tolerance level, then it's fair presentation. But the moment the errors exceed the tolerance level, then you are outside of materiality, and therefore then the auditors might actually bring in an opinion that might be more applicable to your circumstances, which is a qualified opinion.
Oh, okay. So it's about a margin of error, either way.
Yeah, an acceptable one. But then when you go to internal audit is supposed to support management to make sure that the processes that need to be followed are followed well. So instead of internal auditing focusing on a number, they will focus on the fact that for this to have started, it should start at this level. It was done. It was approved at the right level. It was implemented. So it actually
issued a tender.
Yes.
And then the tender was evaluated by a committee that was fully representative.
Exactly.
Not all the members were, or two were absent, or whatever it is. So all of the process, the steps was followed.
And I mean, other people summarize it well to say an internal audit, it's really the eyes and the ears of the audit committee and management in some cases. Because as a CEO of a company or as ExCo, you've got policies and procedures that have to be followed by your company, but then you need to constantly get assurance that those procedures are being followed. Otherwise, if you come up with the rules and you don't monitor compliance, what happens? At the end of 12 months, you realize that no one ever did anything. So an internal audit, it's internal in that it supports the assurance that the processes are being followed and the strategic risks of the company are being managed appropriately.
21 minutes past 11 here on Morning Talk. Give us a call at 0891 10427. That's where you can reach us. Our guest is Sindi Zilwa. She is CEO of Nkonki, talking about the audit process, evaluating and explaining objectives and scope and some of the things that come out of the audit processes.
As a matriarch of the King family, raising sons is never easy, especially when your husband was murdered by one of them. If Paul thinks he's just going to waltz back into King's Casino and pick up where he left off, it'll have to be over my dead body. What goes on behind the scenes of a five-star casino? Well, catch me, Brumilda van Rensburg, in SABC3's new drama, High Rollers, on Tuesday evenings at 8:30 from the 2nd of April, only on SABC3.
In an effort to understand the conditions under which people live and deliver appropriate services, the Mpumalanga Provincial Government will visit your household to collect information. Please welcome the data collectors when they come to your household. Data collectors will be wearing orange reflectors written Mpumalanga Provincial Government at the front and Provincial Profiling at the back. For more information, call Peter Nonyane 083-593-0314 or December Ngambule 082-221-7681 or our toll-free number 0800 20 40 98.
Hi, I'm Ashraf Garda, and no, I'm not telling you to call in on one of my shows right now. In fact, what I'm asking you to do is to read the Classic Feel magazine. It's a magazine that takes you from programs of light classical music to classic rock. And in the March issue, the Classic Feel will take you on a journey starting with quirky musician David Bowie onto some of our best-loved stages, through unique art exhibitions, onto beautiful wine farms, and introduce you to some of South Africa's talented individuals. And there's even more. How much do you know about me? Well, there's a profile about me in the March issue. So get the edition, the March edition of Classic Feel magazine, available now at selected newsagents and bookshops, and check out the website classicfeel.co.za. Classic Feel March issue. Timeless classics for an elite readership.
SAFM is giving you, our listener, a chance to attend this year's 14th Cape Town International Jazz Festival on the 5th and the 6th of April 2013. To stand a chance of receiving double tickets to attend the festival, SMS the keyword Cape Town Jazz and your name to 34766. SMS will cost you R1.50. Free SMSs do not apply. Keep listening to SAFM to find out if you are the winner.
Morning Talk on SAFM.
All right, so let's explore some of what is often associated with reports on after the completion of the audit processes. So people sometimes get a qualified or an unqualified opinion on the expression of their statements of account. What does that mean?
For you, I think maybe let me explain it by way of examples. The first one is that if you've got an unqualified opinion, it's a clean opinion.
Yeah.
Meaning that the audit process has taken place and everything that needed to be verified was verified.
Yeah.
And everything that needed to be complied with was complied with. And there are no reason for auditors to believe that there is no fair presentation or material findings in terms of non-compliance with laws.
Okay.
So that becomes a clean opinion or an unqualified opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you've got a qualified opinion, it means you are satisfied with most of the areas within the set of financial statements and compliance, except for few areas.
Uh-huh.
Like you remember I was talking to you about assets, liabilities, income and expenditure, which is really the makeup of the entire set of financial statements. Now, if the auditor during that process is happy with the liabilities, everything has been supported, assets, but then there is a problem in terms of the income, he can't satisfy himself or herself in that process, then an audit opinion could be everything is fine except for this or except for that. Mm-hmm. And then if you go to a disclaimer is a serious one, because it's when the auditor says, I really cannot, there is no opinion I can express here. The state, I don't have supporting documents, for instance. There is no evidence to support whatever is there. So if you don't give me the evidence that these assets are the assets and those liabilities, I just can't find it, then the auditor is forced to say, I cannot express an opinion on those financial statements.
That's a disclaimer.
It's a disclaimer.
Yeah.
And then at adverse, it's when you are saying, it is definitely not the case.
Yeah.
You're saying you've got assets of 500 million, but I've only proved that you've got assets of 200 million, for instance.
Yeah.
So an adverse will say, these financial statements do not represent the true state of affairs.
Yeah.
So I think those are the kinds of key different opinions that you would have, and then you would have material findings. Material findings will be findings of non-compliance with PFMA or Municipal Financial and Management Act and any other act that you had to comply with.
Okay, just go back a little bit. I mean, if you say, so you've got so much, you say in your books that you've got assets worth 5 million. We can only find proof that your assets are worth 2 million.
Yes.
So we can't find evidence that the other 3 million you are claiming is actually there.
Yes, and you are not, or sometimes you as the company, you bring the evidence, but it's not acceptable.
Yeah.
You just bring a piece of paper and you're saying it's not authentic. No one can place reliance on it.
Yeah.
Like you can't say you own a property on the basis of a letter from your grandmother or your grandfather.
Okay.
It has to be in the deeds office. It must be registered in your name. Now, if that evidence is not acceptable, then there is no way an auditor will be satisfied that those assets are worth 5 million.
Yeah. Well, what does that mean? If you get a qualified or a qualified audit, what does it mean? What are the implications thereof?
The implications vary depending on the seriousness of the qualification itself.
Yeah.
Remember that financial statements need an audit opinion because most people use them and then they rely upon them. Now, if, for instance, you owe money to an institution, you've borrowed 100 million, and one of the conditions is that you've got to submit a set of financial statements every year. Now, they get the set of financial statements which looks good, but the audit opinion says, hey, watch out. That is not the true state of affairs.
Yeah.
So anyone who's supposed to rely on those financial statements will not openly rely on them. If you get something that says it's a disclaimer, I can't say yes or no there, everything is not supported by anything, then now very few people would want to rely on those set of financial statements. So if it's adverse, then definitely no one wants to work with you, because it means an adverse opinion in clear, simple terms is that he or she is lying.
Yeah. Disclaimer?
A disclaimer, that's when you are saying, I cannot express an opinion, because there is no evidence that's supporting this. So really, I can't say who this is.
So internal audit is intended to enable you to have a smooth process and ensure that compliance is done properly. And when you get to external audit, it should, all things being equal, just be a smooth process on the other side.
Yes. Yeah. In a normal process where things are functioning well, you would have an internal audit that's also accountable to the audit committee, because remember there is a governance structure, which is the audit committee, where the internal audit function reports to the audit committee and the external auditors are reporting to the audit committee. Yeah. Hence the audit committee makeup, it's supposed to be made up of independent members with financial literacy, so that they will be in a level to understand what they are talking about and be able to know what actions to take to propel the company to move forward and excel in what they are doing. Now what happens is that if internal audit does its work and it does it well, and then external audit comes in, the external audit can even rely on the work of internal audit and say, okay, here I can only test the numbers because in terms of controls and processes, I already have satisfaction that it's all happening. Yeah. But then that doesn't happen if the external audit, for instance, comes in and then they realize that in terms of the auditing statements, the internal audit has levels of competence and the standards of operation are such that you cannot rely on what they say. Yeah. So you've got to go through a particular process to understand the caliber and the standards and the quality of the work that is done by those internal auditors before you rely on them. But when you rely on them, it will merely be for processes and there's something that they call the combined assurance framework to make sure that you don't have two sets of auditors looking at the same thing for a same purpose. Yeah. But so now external audit and internal audit would coordinate to avoid duplication and make sure that within that combined assurance framework they are able to achieve that. But in a nutshell then, if internal audit does its work well and in such it's effective in the sense that when it points errors, the company rectifies that, and then external audit comes in and looks into the numbers that are supported by processes, chances are, if all is well, you will be able to get a clean opinion. Yeah.
It's 11:30. When we come back, we talk about the Auditor General's report about municipalities. Is it a failure of internal audit? Is it a failure of leadership? Where does it reside? We take your calls as well. 0891 104 207. It is 11:30. We'll be back in a moment. Good morning, Vuyo. Security is very tight at one military hospital in Pretoria, where a delegation led by Defence and Military Veterans Deputy Minister Thabang Makwetla is visiting soldiers wounded in the Central African Republic. SANDF members have been deployed at the main entrance of the hospital, and the media is not being allowed near the entrance. The presidency says doctors are doing everything possible to ensure former President Nelson Mandela's recovery after the latest recurrence of his lung infection. Madiba was admitted to an undisclosed hospital just before midnight. And Oscar Pistorius' murder trial might start before the end of the year. State Advocate Gerinau has told the North Gauteng High Court in Pretoria today that they will serve the indictment on Pistorius' legal team in June and hope to start the trial in the next few months. For SAFM News, I'm Asanda Matsawanyane. Details at 12. Over to you, Vuyo. Happy Easter weekend. And to you, Asanda. Have a great one. Is it still an undisclosed hospital? It's still undisclosed, yeah. Okay. Let's continue our conversation and talking about auditing. Sindi, so municipalities, there's been this campaign to get clean audits by, I think it's in 2014 or something. Yes. Why is it that municipalities and government departments often don't get it right?
First of all, this Operation Clean Audit was set, the vision for it was set in 2009, in July 2009. So yes, in terms of the report, it's a little bit of a disappointment that by 2012, very few companies or departments are closer to that. State departments and municipalities. But then there are many things that they have to get it right, and I think the Auditor General has spelled it very nicely in his report. One of the things that need to get right is stability in leadership. Because an audit process might identify errors of non-compliance in the previous year, and that indicates areas that the company needs to improve upon in the following year. Now, if you had the leadership that was there last year and it's working hard to make sure that those things have to be rectified, and then in the process there's a change in leadership, some other people come in, then the momentum is lost. And which is why then the same findings then will be repeated in the following year. Okay. And then secondly, you look into the internal control environment that's there. If the internal control environment is not effective or is not adequate to prevent mistakes that could actually take place, or to the safeguarding of the assets of the organization, then there is going to be a problem. And if I will have to highlight the other concern that the Office of the AG has, it's the ineffectiveness of the governance structures that have been set to look out for those things. One of them I'd mentioned earlier, Vuyo, that you have got audit committees. Now, audit committees have got the power to ask for accountability. They have the power to demand that certain things must take place, and they can be able to make sure that they are forcing action in a way to take place. Now, if you've got a structure like that you rely upon, and this structure just doesn't do its job, it's not asking for enough accountability, it's just looking into the agenda as it is given to them by management. They are not applying themselves diligently. Then now, when the audit process starts a year later or 6 months later, all those things are discovered. But if the audit committee was quite active and diligent, they would have picked this at the end of quarter 1 and demanded improvement quarter 2. By quarter 4, most of the things would have been rectified. Yes. So I think when you look into all those, it becomes a problem. And then also...
But the Auditor General says this. I mean, it's not unusual, isn't it? I mean, if you started Clean Audit 2009, processes, vision and that, 2010 you say the same thing, 2011 you say the same thing. I mean, it ends up just being talk, isn't it?
Yes. And which is what becomes a frustration. That's where then initially I did talk about the effectiveness of the internal audit. Some internal audit functions are not effective. Why? Because they are operating in an environment where they report that this is wrong and nobody cares. And now that's where you depend on the audit committee to come in and strengthen the voice of the internal audit. So if the voice of the internal audit is not being strengthened, every day it says this is wrong, there is no compliance here. So the effectiveness goes away. So it becomes a problem then. So the tone at the top is important. And when you talk about the top, you're talking management, you're talking the board structures, you're talking the board committee structures like the audit committee, for instance.
But, okay, so stability in leadership. Just juxtapose leadership with systems. If when you're coming in, you're taking over a structure and a system and a program of action that is in place. So it's immaterial who the CEO is or who the municipal manager is, or in local government, that's critical. Because, I mean, I take the point about who is at the helm and, you know, galvanizing process and being vigilant and that kind of thing. But we got a qualified audit last year. So we put into place, we agreed, this is our plan of action. This is how we're going to do things to get to a point where it's not qualified anymore. So it's immaterial who comes in. That's the system that must be followed. It doesn't work like that.
I think we need to be practical about it.
Okay.
There's something called human nature. If you were here...
You audit that as well?
No, you can't audit it. That's why I've got to explain. There's something called human nature. And if you were here as a leader, your critical areas in your mind, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you have momentum, you push everything towards that direction. Human nature is that when the next person comes, he's not going to see the priority areas as the 5 you had. He's going to have another 5, which might not be linked, or they might be, you know, and then in his allocation of resources, he might allocate them differently. That's why I was talking about the break in momentum. The break in momentum slows down, but yes, the progress might be there, it's continuing, but not at the same pace and not at the same speed. And then now by the time it's the following year end, that problem is still there because you lost that momentum during the year.
Fair point. So just in terms of the transformation space and skills development, are we doing well in the country? Are there more auditors emerging, black auditors in particular, black audit firms like yours?
Yes, I would say yes, and I'm going to say no as well. Yes, in the sense that a lot of people are starting to get into the profession, generally across all professions. You know, black people, they are there, they are studying, they are passing, and we are all proud of them. But then you have a problem. Skills development doesn't end at school. It ends from getting the qualification and making sure that you're getting practical experience to build your skills. That's why it's called a skill. It's not a qualification. So if there's still a challenge in making sure that the people who are qualified as CAs or engineers or anything across the board, if they are not getting exposure by being given contracts that would enable them to stimulate their intellectual capabilities, at the end of the day, we're going to have in number so many people who are qualified, but in terms of skill, you still depend on the previously advantaged individuals who are still getting that exposure because of the experience they had previously. So it becomes perpetual.
Yeah.
So a paradigm shift that is practical, not in paper, in terms of creating opportunities for black firms and black companies in general is important. And yes,
is that happening in your space now?
Yes, it is happening in our space. We're really proud of the stance that's taken by the Department of Public Enterprises together with the state-owned companies, because they are taking pride in creating opportunities for black firms, and therefore the intellectual capital landscape of the profession is changing, because now it's not only the big firms that are exposed to those opportunities, but even the emerging firms, they are actually exposed to them.
Yeah. Sindi, thank you very much for coming in to talk to us.
Thank you.
Sindi Zilwa is CEO of Nkonki, talking about auditing with us and what it all entails and those kinds of matters. Now, a friendly reminder from SARS that due